Happy Wednesday, everybody, and thanks for tuning in to the third episode of the Southern Conservative Podcast. My name is Ty. Before we start the podcast today, just a quick follow-up to a story yesterday in which I said that 4 police officers were shot near York, South Carolina. One of those officers is in serious condition, so our thoughts and prayers are with all of those, and we hope that all make a full recovery. We know that the left is unhinged. They certainly have demonstrated this ever since Donald Trump was elected president, and it certainly is evident that they have ramped up their efforts ever since Donald Trump became president. Various Hollywood actors, you'll recall, tried to convince the members of the Electoral College not to cast votes for Donald Trump. Of course, this was in an effort by the left to legitimize the fact that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote over Donald Trump. Of course, it's the Electoral College that elects the President of the United States, not the popular vote. People such as Maxine Waters have called for Trump's impeachment ever since he was inaugurated back in January of last year. Congressman Al Green of Texas actually introduced articles of impeachment. Of course, this went nowhere, but make no mistake about it, folks. If Democrats take control of the House of Representatives next year, they certainly will move forward to try and impeach the President of the United States. There have been accusations that Donald Trump is not fit to be president, whether it's over a tweeting binge or whether it's the left looking at provocations that he's made toward the North Korean leader. They've tried to bring up the 25th Amendment to remove the president from office, but what the left doesn't understand is that it first takes the vice president, and in his opinion, if he feels that the president is either mentally or physically unable to carry out the duties of the office of president, he can then recommend to the cabinet that the president needs to be removed, and it takes a majority of the cabinet. Afterwards, it takes 2/3 of both the Senate and the House to remove the president from office. So it's a much more difficult and a much lengthier process to remove the president than the impeachment process. And of course, the 25th Amendment was meant for cases in which the president was seriously incapacitated, such as the president suffering a stroke or a gunshot wound, etc. It was meant for physical and mental incapacitation in which the president absolutely was unable to carry out the duties of the office. The left has tried to say now that the man's a racist, especially in light of the S-hole comments that supposedly the president made recently. Well, on Tuesday, the left put all of this together. We saw the left absolutely unhinged, whether it was over the report that the White House physician gave over Trump's mental status, whether it was Cory Booker going after the DHS Secretary over Trump's comments about S-hole countries. We're going to get into all of that in today's podcast. But first, I want to get into the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing today, in which the Senate was asking questions of Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen. Now, there was an exchange before the comments made by Cory Booker. There was an exchange between Secretary Nielsen and Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont. This is the story from the Washington Examiner. Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen testified Tuesday that she never heard President Trump use the term S-hole countries to describe Haiti, El Salvador, or African nations in a meeting last week. And this from Patrick Leahy, quote, "You were in the room, you're under oath. Did the president use this word or a substantially similar word to describe certain countries?" And she replied, "I did not hear that word used, no sir." He said, "That's not my question. Did he use anything similar to that, describing certain countries?" And she replied, "The conversation was very impassioned. I don't dispute that the president was using tough language. Others in the room were also using tough language. The concept and context, I believe, in which this came up was the concept that the president would like to move to a merit-based system. He would like to not and no longer look at quotas." So the senator kept pressing her. Did he use what would be considered vulgar language referring to certain countries? And she replied, "The president used tough language in general, as did other congressmen in the room." So Senator Leahy said, "The others aren't president. You imply the president was particularly in support of a merit-based system like those in Australia and Canada. But when he denigrated Haiti and El Salvador and Africa, a country where we are trying to have some ability to match China and others in influence." Now, folks, before I go on, Africa's not a country, Africa's a continent. Someone needs to tell Senator Leahy that. He said he didn't say it's because we needed more PhD students or skilled workers. He said he wanted more people from Norway. Being from Norway is not a skill. Nielsen said Trump had not said specifically that he wanted immigrants from Norway, saying, quote, what he was specifically referring to was the prime minister telling him that people of Norway work very hard. What he was referencing to is from a merit-based perspective, we'd like to have those with skills who can assimilate and contribute to the United States, moving away from a country with quotas to an individual merit-based system. And we all know what the president meant by this, and Kirstjen Nielsen's absolutely right. What the president was referencing in terms of S-hole countries, like El Salvador and Haiti and certain African countries, was that these are countries that are poverty-stricken, they're war-torn, these are countries in which women are abused, beaten, raped. You have folks that are illiterate, they lack education, and they would lack the skills necessary that when they came to the United States, they would be unable to support themselves. They would be a burden on society. They'd be a burden on the taxpayers because they would be living off the government, essentially. They have no means of supporting themselves. You know, if you don't know English, if you don't have some sort of education or skills where you can get a job in this country and support yourself, the president wants to move away from that. And sadly, you look at countries like Haiti, you look at countries like El Salvador, these are very poor countries. The education in those countries isn't spectacular. And when you look at a country like Norway, several European countries, the education system is much better than in the United States. Certainly countries like China and other Asian countries, Japan, for instance. The president wants to take folks from those countries, those that can contribute to society, and those that have the skills to take care of themselves. Well, later on down the line, it was Cory Booker's turn to ask questions, and he was none too impressed with what Kirstjen Nielsen had to say over Donald Trump's S-hole comments. So I'm going to play a little bit of what Cory Booker had to say. Now, this is just a portion of what he had to say, but it gives you an idea of exactly how he felt about Secretary Nielsen's comments.
The commander-in-chief, in an Oval Office meeting, referring to people from African countries and Haitians with the most vile and vulgar language. The language festers. When ignorance and bigotry is allied with power, it is a dangerous force in our country. Your silence and your amnesia is complicity. Right now in our nation, we have a problem. I don't know if 73% of your time is spent on white supremacist hate groups. I don't know if 73% of your time is spent concerned about the people in fear in communities in this country, Sikh Americans, Muslim Americans, Black Americans. The fact pattern is clear of the threats in this country. I hurt. When Dick Durbin called me, I had tears of rage when I heard about his experience in that meeting. And for you not to feel that hurt and that pain and to dismiss some of the questions of my colleagues, saying I've already answered that line of questions when tens of millions of Americans are hurting right now because of what they're worried about what happened in the White House. That's unacceptable to me. There are threats in this country. People plotting. I receive enough death threats to know the reality. Kamala receives enough death threats to know the reality. Maisie receives enough death threats to know the reality. And I've got a president of the United States whose office I respect, who talks about the countries of origins of my fellow citizens in the most despicable of manner. You don't remember. You can't remember the words of your commander-in-chief. I find that unacceptable. Mr. Chairman, I'm grateful to be on this committee. I'm more than ever today happy I am here. Thank you.
So let's break down a little bit what Senator Booker had to say. First, Trump wasn't referring to the people of African countries. He wasn't referring to Haitians in particular. The S-hole comment had to deal with the countries themselves, and for the reasons I've already discussed. Second, those aren't bigoted comments that the president made. And Trump isn't combining bigotry with power. As the secretary said, the president wants immigrants who come to this country to be literate, to have skills and the ability to support themselves so they don't have to live off the government. And once again, folks, you look at El Salvador and Haiti and other African countries, different countries in Asia even. They're very poor countries. They have low literacy rates, a lack of education. And what we need in this country is productive citizens. And by the way, when you refer to the term S-hole, that's the whole reason why immigrants want to come to America. It's because they want to leave the S-hole countries. They think that they'll have a better life here in this country than they did in their home country. Because if their home country was so glamorous, if the land where they came from allowed them to be prosperous and they could thrive in their own country, they would have no reason to come here. And I'm sure the citizens who came from these poor, poverty-stricken, war-torn countries, those with unstable governments, those plagued with terrorism, those who torture, rape, beat, and abuse women, they would tell you that their countries are S-hole countries. Cory Booker said he had tears of rage when he heard what Dick Durbin had to tell him. Let me tell you something, folks. Cory Booker's grandstanding because he has his eyes set on the White House in 2020. Make no mistake about it. That's the bottom line. The president's comments are in dispute. The secretary can't recall these words. You have two Republican senators, David Perdue and Tom Cotton, say that they can't recall the president saying these words. Further, why do tens of millions of Americans need to worry about what Trump is doing and saying in a closed-door session with members of Congress? Right? Cory Booker said that tens of millions of people are scared at the comments that the president made. Well, was Cory Booker, now granted Cory Booker wasn't a senator at the time, but, is he concerned that there was a president that was having oral sex with an intern in the White House back in the 90s? How about his thoughts of his own party having a long-standing history of violence and lynching against African Americans, right? Some of the things that I pointed out on Monday. But what I find amazing in this whole exchange with Secretary Nielsen is not only the distortion of what Donald Trump supposedly said, but the rage that he had toward the female secretary. Just imagine, folks, for a second, if this was a Republican senator directing those comments toward a female secretary of President Obama's, such as his first Secretary of State Hillary Clinton or his second Attorney General Loretta Lynch. Imagine if that was a Republican senator making comments toward those two women. What do you think the reaction would be from the left? What do you think the reaction would be from the mainstream media? How about organizations such as the National Organization for Women? What do you think they would have to say? Because they're pretty silent when it comes to these sorts of comments directed toward Kirstjen Nielsen. These comments are absolutely outrageous. Cory Booker ought to be ashamed of himself. And again, you can go on YouTube, folks. The videos all over the place. If you want to hear all of the comments that Cory Booker had to say to the Homeland Security Secretary, you can certainly do so. I'm not going to play those comments for you. You've got a taste of what he had to say, and you can certainly go look at those things yourself. Well, the White House physician came out today and gave us a summary. Actually, he gave a pretty detailed description of the state of the president's health. Now, I've looked at what the doctor had to say, and I got to tell you, in my experience as a hospital pharmacist, I have to say that for someone who's 71 years old, the president's health is absolutely fantastic. It's excellent. He's in excellent health. The doctor went over lab values. He went over different conditions that the president had, talked about his male pattern baldness. He has occasional rosacea. The biggest concern was that he has high cholesterol. And when you look at his cholesterol numbers, they're not really sky high. It's his LDL, which is the bad cholesterol, and his total cholesterol numbers, which are high. But you look at everything else, his vital signs, pulse, blood pressure, they were fine. His blood sugar was fine. He doesn't have diabetes. Blood counts were normal. His thyroid was normal. Kidney function is normal. His PSA, which is a measure of the prostate, that was normal. He had his appendix removed when he was 11 years old, and he has no current use of alcohol or tobacco, and he does not have a history of alcohol or tobacco use. So other than the cholesterol, folks, there's not a damn thing wrong with this president. Now, the doctor also said during this press conference that the president requested that a mental health exam, a cognitive exam in particular, be administered. The doctor didn't feel that it was necessary and didn't feel that it was indicated given Trump's history and given the fact that the doctor said that he must see the president when he's in the White House 2 to 3 times every day. They don't necessarily talk about health, they talk about other things. But just from the conversations that the doctor has with the president, he can tell that the man is mentally sharp. There's no cognitive deficit with the president. But at any rate, the president had requested that he be given a mental exam. And here's what the doctor had to say about the findings from that mental exam.
I've got to know him pretty well, and I had absolutely no concerns about his cognitive ability or his neurological function. So I was not going to do a cognitive exam. I had no intention of doing one. The reason that we did the cognitive assessment is plain and simple because the president asked me to do it. We picked one of the ones that was a little bit more involved. It was longer. It was the more difficult one of all of them. It took significantly longer to complete, but the president did exceedingly well on it. So that was not driven at all by any clinical concerns I have. It was driven by the president's wishes, and he did well on it. The fact that the president got 30 out of 30 on that exam, I think that there's no indication whatsoever that he has any cognitive issues. And on a day-to-day basis, like I said before, it's been in my experience that the president, he's very sharp, and he's very articulate when he speaks to me, and I've never known him to repeat himself, around me. He says what he's got to say, and he speaks his mind based on my exam, and the cognitive testing that we did, and just my day-to-day interactions with the president. The president is mentally very, very, very sharp, very intact. And
he is fit for duty.
Absolutely, he's fit for duty. I think he will remain fit for duty for the remainder of this term and even for the remainder of another term if he's elected.
Can you explain to me how a guy who eats McDonald's and Kentucky Fried Chicken and all those Diet Cokes and who never exercises is in as good a shape as you say he's in?
It's called genetics. I don't know. It's some people have just great genes. I told the president that if he had a healthier diet over the last 20 years, he might live to be 200 years old.
Now, you heard there toward the end that one of the media reporters brought up how in the world is the president this physically fit, considering his high-fat diet, the fact that he doesn't exercise. And the doctor said it's genetics. He's got good genes. And folks, let me tell you something. I'm a big believer in genetics and certain people having good genes. I'm sure we all know somebody who smoked and has gotten lung cancer, but I'm sure we all know someone that just puffs away on cigarettes and it doesn't affect them at all, right? They've never had cancer. They've died not having lung cancer. They might have some breathing problems, but no malignancies. And I can tell you for a fact, you look at my great-grandparents, people who put lard in just about everything they ate, they lived to be 97 and 100 years old. That's good genes right there, folks. In fact, I actually have a great-aunt and a great-uncle who are still living. They're currently 93 years old, and my great-uncle will be 96 years old next month. These are my grandma's siblings. She's since passed, but these two are still living. That's good genes. Here's where the media reporters totally went unhinged. They started asking all kinds of crazy questions, and I'm going to play some of these comments courtesy of a montage put together by Sean Hannity's crew on Fox News last night. They asked questions about his eating habits, lack of exercise, his mental fitness, whether or not he wears dentures, how much ice cream he eats, whether the doctor was concerned about the president's Twitter use, and so on. So here's some of the questions, the more ridiculous ones, that they had to ask the doctor.
Can you assess the president's mental fitness for office?
The president appeared to slur his words while giving an address. Did you look into what the cause of that might have been at all?
Are you ruling out things like early onset Alzheimer's? Are you looking at dementia-like symptoms?
On what basis would you, and this is just a philosophical question, advise the cabinet that the president is unable to discharge his duties? How does that bar get met?
When you analyze his cognitive ability or his neurological functions, that is not the same thing as a psychiatric exam or a psychological exam.
It is not.
You mentioned that you gave the president a cognitive test. Was that the mini mental state examination or the Boltzmann test? Or if not, can you tell us what specific cognitive test you gave?
It was.
Given that there's scrutiny of what was overlooked at the time with President Reagan in terms of Alzheimer's and things he was then known to suffer from at a later date. Can you say that whether the test that you ran would exclude any of those things?
Because of his age, in continuing his physicals in the future, will you also continue the cognitive testing?
You say that the president was the one who requested the cognitive test, that it wasn't necessarily needed for someone of his age. Did he tell you why he wanted it done?
What is your take of all the doctors and clinicians all across the country who have said that in this president they see symptoms of this, that, and the other?
Symptoms in what way?
Well, symptoms of dementia.
Mr. President,
He's a germaphobe, that he washes his hands obsessively and is concerned about that. Have you seen any indication of that type of behavior?
Does he watch too much TV?
I don't.
From a sedentary lifestyle sort of perspective, should he cut back on that?
Do you see any evidence of bone spurs, which the president said that he suffered from? Is he limited to one scoop of ice cream now?
Do you have any concerns about the president's use of Twitter?
No, I don't. Yeah, Twitter doesn't involve me as a doctor. I don't have any concern on that.
Does the president wear dentures? You
He does
mentioned the
not.
dental exam.
The president has no partial or indentures of any kind.
You said he doesn't drink and he doesn't smoke, and other than the diet issue, did you address drug addiction?
Drug addiction?
I mean,
Yeah.
any other drugs?
Yeah, no, he has no drug addiction.
So as you can see, folks, those left-wing media reporters totally went unhinged yesterday. And it makes you question whose mental state we really need to look at. Do we need to look at the president's, or do we need to look at the mental state of the liberal news media? I want to end by reminding everybody to please check out the Facebook page, facebook.com/Southern Conservative. It's facebook.com/Southern Conservative. There you'll find articles from different conservative news outlets on stories you probably won't hear about in the mainstream media. The Facebook page also has links to all of the podcasts. And don't forget, please subscribe to this channel. Please click the subscribe button. And as a quick reminder, all of the podcasts are made daily, Monday through Thursday. Have a great day, everyone, and I hope that you tune in tomorrow.